Start recording. Well, thank you for letting me talk your ear off about your book, The Good News About Marriage. I'm so pumped. I remember running into you with my dad, I think at AACC.
Yep.
And you started telling us about this. And so I've been waiting for it to come out. And then I got it in the mail and I was like, oh, my dad's on the front.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, because he's like so, picky about what he endorses. As you know, he reads the whole thing from cover to cover if he's going to endorse it. And we both were so excited about this. And I, if you can see, I have pretty much every page. I'm like, if I earmark every page, then how am I going to figure out what it is that I want to talk to her about? But thank you for doing this. Obviously, you've been a longtime friend of our family, and you and my father have worked together on some different things. But I feel like this book is probably going to be the most revolutionary for our culture and my generation, just in terms of having hope for marriage. Like, my dad and I did the Illumination Project, and our whole last section of that was, why should we have hope for marriage? Because I realize and I see that people don't. When you hear things, I literally was reading this book last night at a place right near my house that has air conditioning because my apartment doesn't. And my friend who literally got a divorce 2 days ago dropped by and was like, what are you reading? And so
Awkward.
I know, but we're going through this journey together. Like, she was like, can I read that after you, So, I feel like, the story that you told at the very end about how, when you were in college and you got that white car and you thought nobody else had white cars. and then you're like, and then I started seeing white cars everywhere. That's exactly what happened to me when I was thinking about moving up to Oregon from LA. I went to my dad and I was like, Dad, I've been seeing Oregon license plates everywhere. I think that's a sign that I'm supposed to move to Oregon. And he goes, start looking for Ohio license plates. Which was your point.
Exactly.
Is like, if we hear about our friends who are getting divorced, or we hear about marriages that are so difficult, we finally get to a point where we're like, what's the point? This is too much work. So enough of me talking. I just kind of want to go through some of the things that you're most excited about in this book. You have those 5 principles that you kind of break down, but truly there has been so much misunderstanding about research, and I respect the way that you do research so well. It's one of the reasons I stopped even reading academic journals is because I would read them and then I'd get to the back and I'd be like, oh, this was a sample of 20 people in a small village, and I'd be like, what? I just wasted. What does this mean? So you have picked all that stuff apart and you have debunked the 50% divorce rate statistic. So tell us about how that happened.
Yeah, well, it actually got started. I don't know if you knew this. I used to be a newspaper columnist, and I was writing a column on divorce, and I wanted to figure out, I wanted to cite it correctly.
Yeah.
Because I thought, maybe it's not actually 50, maybe it's 48.7 or something, and I thought, okay, so I should be accurate and put the real number down, and started trying to figure out what is it, and first of all, saw that it was really confusing. I mean, this whole area is like one giant, it makes your eyes roll back in your head, like looking at all the data out there. But then the next thing that I was seeing is that the numbers that I was actually looking at in some of the data tables, they didn't match the conventional wisdom of this really awful, the state of marriage is so bad. And I was starting to see all this stuff that was actually pretty good news and really encouraging. And I thought, okay, this is crazy. First of all, that I can't figure out what the divorce rate is. Shouldn't that be simple? But then secondly, that what I was seeing was so much better. And it was really interesting. It was almost like it grabbed me by the neck and wouldn't let me go. Yeah. That was 8 years ago, more than 8 years ago now. And I couldn't stop looking at it. It became a bit, I know this sounds awful, it became a bit of an obsession. I mean, sort of
you were like a detective. You had to be.
Yeah, well, it was, I hate to say it, but it mattered so much. I said, if this is true, the implications of this are huge.
Yeah.
because I do so much work with, men and women and marriages and couples, like you guys, like the love and respect ministry. And one of the common denominators that I had seen over the years that was actually really powerful and very clear is that really there's only one factor, there's only one common denominator underneath whether a marriage makes it or not, and it's whether the couple has a sense of hope or not.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all seen it. If a couple thinks, this is awful, we're going through a bad time, but we're going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely different outcome.
Yeah.
Than once they start thinking, this is never going to get better. And so the problem is that sort of sense of futility kills a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I had seen from all this research that we have this culture-wide feeling of futility.
Yes.
And it's like everybody thinks a marriage is being in trouble, and everybody thinks that, why even bother getting married? And if you start having problems, well, half of everybody else couldn't make it either, so it makes it easy to give up. And so realizing that the news is so much better, it actually makes a big life difference.
Yeah.
So I felt like I had to investigate this and try to find out what the truth was.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you did. I mean, I think right after we had run into you and you were telling us about this, or right before, it was around this time, I had two really good friends that I had known for a long time I've only been married for like a year or something. Mm. And they both came out of homes where one of their parents had been unfaithful and another one of their parents had said that they stayed in their marriage 20 years too long. And so they were just starting to hit some bumps in the road, and those voices and those experiences were what stood out to them. And they were being very, very mature. They were just like, let's be honest about this. Like, before we have kids, like, maybe we should just call this quits. And I was like, like I knew the whole thing that you talk about, that my father talks about assuming the best, and really like it's these little things that we focus on when in the actual, these are two good-willed people. And I was like, will you promise me for 6 months, just do not even utter the word divorce anymore, and go into this as if this isn't going to end, that you are going to stick this out. And it did. Yeah. It shifted things for them. Like they're not bad people. They were just trying to be like you said, like, look at what's out there and let's be mature and honest. But if they would have known these stats, which tell us now how you came to the new stat that you have.
Yeah, well, there's several, actually. And probably the most important, kind of the bottom line, is for people to know, anyone who's listening to this, the idea of a 50% divorce rate really is a myth. It has never been close. We think that there's a 50% divorce rate because we hear that so often. And I've said it from the stage. Everybody just assumes that that's the case. But the numbers, the reason it's so hard to find the right numbers is this area is so complicated, and the people that I respect in this field, the demographers, the sociologists, the university professors, they continue to project that at some point we'll get to a 40 to 50% divorce rate. They say, if you get married today, your odds of getting divorced are 40 to 50%. That is their projection. It's been that way for years, ever since no-fault divorce came in the 1970s. The divorce rate started rising, and people were like, oh my gosh, if this keeps up, we're going to get to a 50% divorce rate someday.
And then people latched onto that.
And people latched onto that, and they continue to project that. But I come in as an outsider, and I look at the numbers that have actually happened. What has actually been measured? Ignore the projections for a minute.
Yeah.
And we have never gotten close to that number for society as a whole. Now, there are some subgroups, some, higher risk groups.
Yeah.
Like, you get married as a teenager.
Yeah.
For example, if you get married at age 17 or 18 or 19, those groups do have closer to a 50% divorce rate.
Yeah.
But that's like 5% of the population.
Yeah.
The vast majority, on average, we've never gotten close. So it's pretty hard to figure out what the numbers actually are, but we can get closer. We know that right now, for example, according to the Census Bureau, 71% of women are still married to their first spouse.
It's huge.
That's huge, okay? And the 29% that aren't, a big chunk of that is actually people that were married for 50 or 60 years and their spouse died.
Yes,
right?
That was like the hugest thing to me. I was like, wow, we have created statistics about divorce based on a demographic of people that never got divorced.
Exactly. I mean, it's so ironic. You know, they lived in this wonderful marriage for 50 or 60 years, and they're included in what people think are the divorce rates. It's really ironic. So we can't know what the first marriage divorce rate actually is, because those numbers are death and divorce of marriages that have ended.
Yeah.
But we can get closer. There's about a 14% rate of widowhood. I think in the book I said about a 10% rate of widowhood, but the numbers, actually, this is why a book is hard, because you can't adjust it quite as easily. Yeah. We've since found it's actually even higher. It's more like 14%. We can estimate that maybe we know it's got to be less. The divorce rate has to be less than 29, because that's death and divorce. Maybe about 20 to 25% of first marriages have ended in divorce. Now, okay, still way too high. Right? Yeah. I mean, you know, that's still nothing to like do handsprings about. But think about it. It's a whole lot different. It's a completely different thing to say, okay, 20 to 25% of first marriages. That means the vast majority of first marriages last a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's a completely different feeling than 50. So it gives us the ability, like with your friends, who are like thinking this is a problem. What are we going to do? I don't like this anymore. This hurts. This is painful. To be able to say, okay, you take them by the shoulders and you say, okay, here's what you need to know. You're going to get through this. Yeah. Because most people do.
Yeah. Well, and even what I love about your book as well is like you go into this whole thing of like, well, I'll let you tell the story, but
there's
a higher percentage of people we know now that are staying together. The divorce rate is not as glim, but there's also like we do the same stories of like how hard marriage is for the people that are sticking it out. So again, there's this mentality of like, okay, yeah, maybe I could stick it out. Maybe I'm a disciplined person, but do I want to? And you're going, there's totally a misconception about how happy people are in marriage. Yeah. And you showed this by, you were explaining this to a couple that does marriage conferences or something, and you were like, let me just show you. And you pulled over 2 college students and tell what happened.
Yeah, I do this all the time, actually. Whenever I'm sitting down and briefing, I brief a lot of pastors on this, and I was at this, the story I told in the book is I was briefing 2 speakers on marriage and university leaders who do a lot of research in this area themselves. And I said, let me just show you the perception that we have out there. And I do this all the time. And I grabbed a couple of graduate students who were sitting at the table next to ours. And I said, you know, can I interrupt you for a second? I'm a social researcher. I always carry around a copy of the book with my picture on it so I can prove like I'm not
a weirdo.
Yeah, exactly. I might be a weirdo, but this is legitimate. And I asked them this question. I said, what percentage of marriages do you think are happy? Mm-hmm. I ask this all the time now. And I'm not asking if the person's own marriage is happy. I'm sort of saying out there, you know, as a perception. What are you thinking? And if I ask 10 people that question, mm-hmm. 8 of them are going to tell me about 30% of marriages are happy. I think these graduate students guessed even less than that, like 15, 25, 30%, somewhere in there. And they were stunned, and people are stunned when I tell them the real average is 80%.
Yeah.
80% of marriages are happy. Now, that's not perfect. You know, there's still plenty of people have issues.
That was you even averaging like super, super happy with like pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, those are just, that's just in general. People just enjoy being married. Yeah. I mean, most people, there's about an 80-20, you know. Yeah. And that's not perfect, you know, the people who are in that 80%, but even amongst those people who, you know, have some ups and downs, in general, they like being married. They enjoy being married. It doesn't mean there aren't bumps.
Yeah.
But this is what people need to know is that if they're living together because they think the fire goes out after a few years, you know what? Myth. Total myth.
Yeah. Well, and it's not only that they're happy in marriage, but then you've asked them the question, correct me if I'm wrong, but like if you could choose to marry this person all over again, would you? And that was across the board, even for people who are a little bit less happy in marriage, that they still would choose that person. Yes. And then you went on to share like, okay, so then let's step back. This is something that I feel like I've talked with a lot of people about, of like, do you think divorce is going to make you happier? Like I've talked to people who've gotten divorced, and it was their initiation of getting the divorce, and they'll admit now, like this was the hardest thing. Even though I felt like it was the right thing, it's still the worst thing you can ever go through is a divorce. And so I don't think people think about that. Like, oh, I'm probably not going to become happier.
Yeah, no, I've walked several close friends through that process, which is excruciating, as you know, to see somebody's marriage end. And in every case, there was one person I know who got a divorce because of abuse. And so that's a different situation, right? But in every other case where it was just a normal marriage that had a lot of pain, they'd gotten into a cycle that was really negative. I could see, by the way, your dad's crazy cycle written all over all of these problems.
Yeah.
But, and it's really interesting, now, a couple years later, for example, talking to the husband who initiated the divorce with one of these women, good friends of mine, and my husband would sit down with him over coffee, and he would say, it hasn't turned out like I thought it would. Like I got the divorce because I thought this would happen and this would happen and it would be better for the kids in the end to not have all this conflict, and instead it's just traded one set of problems for a completely different set of problems, and the grass is not greener. And kind of, if I had to do it, this is a common theme. Like if they knew what they knew today, they wouldn't have done it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about getting out there the fact that they're often doing that because they have a bad idea of how long it's going to last, how little hope there is to begin with, and how much different it'll be if people know the vast majority of marriages are happy or can get back to happy.
Yeah. Well, that's that research that we often quote as well, of just the thing of like, if you are in a really unhappy marriage, people that stayed in it 5 years later were happy. And it's like that's something that I think our generation is really struggling with, because we don't have that mentality of sticking things out for a long time. We don't know what ebb and flow means, and when something gets a little bit bad, we equate that to I made the wrong decision, not just like, oh, this is a season.
Well, it's also and this is also something that we found in the research for women only and for men only, about how men and women think specifically in some of these areas.
For people who don't know, these are two other great books that you wrote back in 2006, 2004?
I actually, 2004, 2006, and we re-released them with all the new research last year.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course your dad's stuff is all through there.
Yes.
And the thing that we found, though, really interesting, you were talking about this idea of ebb and flow and, giving up too quickly. There's another issue there that people need to understand. And it's something we found out about women, actually, that is so relevant to this. For women, what we found is, most men know that women need to feel loved. They don't realize how easy it is for women to not feel loved. And they don't realize how easy it is for a woman to assume a slippery slope. Okay? So there's problems, and to her, that means we're on the verge of divorce.
Yeah.
And to him, it's like, it's just a problem. This is just an argument. They don't realize that this is like, in her mind,
we go from 0 to 60.
Yeah, it was interesting. We, Jeff and I just did a marriage conference, a week or two ago in Dallas, and a woman said something there. I was like, oh my gosh, that's the perfect example. I was talking about the research for the cousin book to this one about happy marriages.
Yeah.
Because we'd done all this research with happily married couples to try to find out, what's your secret sauce?
Yeah.
What is it that's making you so happy? And in order to figure out the happy couples versus everyone else, we asked people to say, in answer to a question, are you, oh, here comes my cat.
I love it. What's its name?
His name is Storm, and he always jumps up on top of in front of my webcam whenever I'm doing an interview. It's really embarrassing.
I think I honestly have some weird thing with cats. There's so many feral cats in my neighborhood. Like, I'll go for a walk. I walk in my neighborhood all the time, and it's like we make eyes and we like connect. And I have this See? Storm, you love me. I'm not kidding.
You, Joy.
The other night, it got to the point, because I always then in my head, I'm like, they're going to gang up on me or something. The other night, a cat literally jumped onto my leg. But it was like... I know, I freaked out. But the thing is, I wear these muumuus in the summertime. It's a weird thing. And it flows on the bottom. And I think that it thought I was playing with it. And I'm like, I am not playing with you.
That is awesome.
Yeah, so that's a little glimpse into my neighborhood. Anyways, back to statistics.
Back to statistics. So here's, we were talking about this gal and the sort of feeling of slippery slope.
Yeah.
You know, we're having problems and we're going to get divorced. And it's interesting when I was telling her and telling the audience about these happily married couples and how we kind of categorize them by asking them to answer this one question of, are you generally happy in your marriage and enjoying being married?
Yeah.
And my cat is determined. He likes you a lot, Joy.
Storm, you heard about my muumuus, didn't you?
Yep. And it was really interesting, actually, because one of the in order to answer that question, I gave everybody about, a scale of 1 to 5.
Yeah.
And in answer to you, are you generally enjoying your marriage? You generally happy in your marriage? 1 was yes, exclamation point. And 2 was, I think, yes, most of the time. 3 was sometimes yes, sometimes no. And on down from there. Yeah. So I didn't realize this, but several of the couples went out to dinner that night and the wife grilled the husbands on where would you be? Which would you have chosen? Would you have chosen 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, yeah. Right? I was not expecting this. I've got to, in the next marriage conference, yeah. I've got to say, don't do this.
The husbands are like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so one of the husbands said that he would have chosen 3. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Because, they've had this kind of ups and downs. Yeah. And indeed, if in my research, if one person in the couple chose 3, I wouldn't say that that's a really happy marriage. That might be an okay marriage. It's not a crisis in any way, but it's just
Yeah.
Right? It's just not the great marriage they want. So anyway, so the husband told his wife he'd probably choose sometimes yes, sometimes no. And she was like, oh my gosh, oh, we're going to get divorced. Oh my gosh. And he's like, why are you freaking out? What do you mean, why am I freaking out? You just told me we're about to get divorced. No, I didn't. I just said sometimes it's just kind of it's not a great, we're not in a really happy place. We're in okay place, but we both want more than okay.
Yeah.
And it was, and this is an answer to your thing about young people don't realize the ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Well, there's another element here. It's a gender element too, because women really truly are worried. Everybody has different insecurities. Mm-hmm. This is ours. Yeah. It's a question of, are we okay?
Yeah.
Are we going to be okay? And when you think, oh my gosh, we're on the road to divorce, you start acting out of that insecurity. You start assuming the other person isn't that good-willed person. You start seeing, the next time, I'm really worried about this couple because the next time that he says something that's innocuous, like, oh, I can't believe you did that, she could get all upset and jump all over him where she wouldn't have before, just because now she's,
on high alert.
On high alert. And this is the problem, is we have to back off of that and realize, no, wait, let's look at the reality. The reality is that most marriages last a lifetime.
Yeah.
The reality is that most marriages are happy, not perfect, but happy.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you can get back to that. And the other myth I debunk in the book is that doing that isn't rocket science. You know, it's just changing a few simple things.
Yeah.
So everybody chill.
Yeah.
Basically.
No, I think that's something, and even I will say for myself and my peers in dating, like, we just need to chill a little bit. I feel like sometimes it's even harder in dating because you don't have the security of marriage, so you're a little bit more like, you read into everything and you're like, oh, they hate me. I literally was having a conversation with one of my guy friends, and I was telling him about this guy that I was interested in, and I was like, yeah, I think we're probably going to get together, and I think he's going to tell me that he's, not interested. And so then this guy friend was like, and this is what I do, for work, which I shouldn't be. And I was telling him kind of the patterns and why I thought this was going the way that it was going. And he was like, wow. And I was like, no, trust me. I know guys. And he goes, no, you don't. He's like, this guy likes you. You're gonna. And I literally had just I had taken every little thing that had made me a little unsure, and I had built it up to this and he just made me realize I was a little bit crazy. But you one of the things that is another element that I feel like in the midst of conflict, if people just stopped and remembered about their spouse, was you showed that 99% of spouses deeply care, and they're like, I just wish what were the phrases that you
I just basically this it's actually 99.375%, it's a really high number that they absolutely care about their spouse, and it doesn't mean things are perfect.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they can't be a jerk sometimes. Yeah. But they really appreciate their spouse. And the problem is that we start assuming, like what you're talking about. Yeah. It doesn't just change just because you get married, by the way. we always tell men, you realize there is no switch in your wife's brain that gets flipped to now I feel permanently loved position, right? Yeah. It doesn't change just because you're married. Guys think that automatically means she knows I love her, and it doesn't. You have to show her that every day. So anyway, that assumption needs to change so that people recognize, even in really distressed relationships, the other person really cares about you. Yeah. Now, they may not know how to show it properly, and they may really have hurt your feelings, but that doesn't mean they wanted to hurt your feelings.
Yeah. Totally.
And they have to assume that this person, yes, there's going to be the small percentage of psychopaths, right? Yeah. There just is. But the vast majority. Well, we asked 1,260 people that question about whether, and this is all anonymous, completely independent. They could be, and they were very honest, very awkwardly honest in some cases. But on this one, 1,260 people, only 9 people said that they just didn't really care about their spouse anymore. They were so done and so gone, and they weren't necessarily divorced, but they were just checked out. Checked out. And that was 9, not 9%, 9 people.
Wow. Well, and I think that's something, again, you and I both know there's extreme cases. There are the psychopaths. Is there the abuse, but that game changer, I think, that my dad talks about is assuming the best, the goodwill in people, and just this common misunderstanding. You told a story in your book about a guy who his wife had said that he was a narcissist and he was something else, and so then he had moved out, right? And they had 2 daughters, and it was just tearing him apart. But then he heard on the radio, he heard you talking about for women only. And the hugest shock to him was, I can't believe that women don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we both assume. In college, I took a conflict resolution and reconciliation class. And the biggest point that stuck with me is, you will never get to a solution if you don't believe that your co-arguer on some level has value or worth, or has a different opinion that may be, as my dad says, not wrong, just different kind of thing. Yep. So then tell me what happened next with I know what happens, but tell them.
This story still makes me cry. And the thing is, we've had this multiplied, just like with you guys in your ministry. We've seen this multiplied hundreds and thousands of times, stories like this. So this guy is a truck driver, and he heard that on the radio, and he was just shocked that his wife didn't already know these things. And it had been killing him. He'd been living, I think, a couple hours away near his truck depot area, and missing his daughters, and just, it was killing him. And so he heard that, and the next, I think the next truck stop he pulled into or something, those spinner racks, that have the books.
Yeah.
And he saw the For Men Only book. Now, he had been hearing me talk about For Women Only to help women understand men, but here's now the book to help him understand women. And he read it, I guess, at some point on breaks or whatever, or just pieces of it, and he just didn't know some of these things.
Yeah.
And he went home, he went straight to his wife's house, which they used to share.
Yeah.
And he kind of held the book open and pointed to a couple things and said, "Is this true of you? Like, seriously?"
Yeah.
And they started this conversation, and he went and moved out of his stuff and came home. And it makes me cry, because it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
It's just these little things that get in the way, and they don't need to.
And you just think, like, if you hadn't written those books, if you hadn't turned on the radio, like, those two little girls would have parents that are not together, you know?
Well, and this is what it tells me. My books, your dad's books, just so many of those resources out there. And I look at this and I'm like, let me hold up an example of this. Hold on, I've got my little bookcase here. Okay, so look how thin this book is, right?
Yeah.
This is for women only. This is the one he heard about on the radio.
Yeah.
This is like 180 pages or something.
Yeah.
If a 180-page book can save a marriage, there are millions of unnecessary divorces going on.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
You know, that is an example. What he just said is the norm.
Yeah.
You had a marriage where people cared about each other, and they had just gotten into a rut. They had gotten into hurt feelings. They had no idea how to get out of it.
Yeah, and it's so simple. Same thing with this. I mean, you even print it small pages, like, and because you do so much extensive research and detail. I literally last night I read it. Basically, I read it in a long evening, and I was like getting to the end, and all of a sudden it ended about 30 pages before I thought it was going to be, because of all your footnotes and all this stuff. And I immediately texted a friend of mine who's in a serious relationship, and I think he has some just hesitations with pulling the trigger on proposing. And I said, I want you. This is not like a suggestion.
Here's your homework.
I said, go get this book. It'll take you a couple hours to read. Like, do it. Trust me, it'll give you hope. And I think there is like this. I think that's one of the big contributors to the delay of marriage is, you know, there's a number of factors, but I think fear is a huge one. And to see that, to just be reminded that, like, it can be not only can it work, but it can can help us be happy. And I don't know how much more time you have, but I feel like didn't you say this one was geared more towards people of faith and like helping pastors kind of, because that's been a huge discouragement, is people within the church going, how am I any different if they say the divorce rate's exactly the same?
Oh, this was one of the things, even though the research was, you know, nationwide, and even though it was on everything, there is certainly an element here where I'm speaking directly to people of faith, because everybody who goes to church has heard a pastor say, and we've all said it in the church. I've said it. I said all of these things. I just didn't know that they were wrong.
Yeah.
We've all heard people say, well, the rate of divorce is the same in the church. And we have just assumed that was correct. And it is a giant misunderstanding of the Barna data. And everybody thinks George Barna found that. And he didn't, because he didn't study people in the church. That wasn't even what he was trying to study.
Yeah.
He was only studying belief systems. And so that means basically someone who says, I'm a Christian, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm an atheist, those people have the same divorce rates. But he excluded whether they went to church.
Yeah, the actual practice.
The actual practice. It's not just, a head thing, but, we try to make this a part of our life. And so the people who were in church last week, I bought the Barna data, and we reran all the numbers. And based on the Barna studies, and frankly, there's been about 5 or 6 others that have been done, they've all found the exact same thing independently, which is that if it's not just a belief system, but you actually go to church, you get to be a part of that community, the divorce rate drops anywhere from 25 to 50%.
Wow.
That's huge.
It is.
It's huge, not just for the average person who sits in the pew to know. It's huge for the pastor. I do a lot of work with churches. I know you guys do too. And right now pastors are really discouraged because they think they can't stand on stage and say with confidence that it matters if people attend church, that it matters for their marriage, because they think I have a lack of integrity saying that because Barna proved it doesn't. And they need to know that is absolutely not true. I am telling so many pastors, I'm trying to get the word out there. Do not preach another sermon, about marriage that mentions it before you get this information, and try to get a primer on this.
Well, because they probably on some level feel a little hypocritical because they're trying to give hope to people in every other area of their life. They're looking at what scripture says. They're talking about, and then you've got these just blaring in our face statistics, and then they're kind of like, but maybe, so it is. I feel like it is reflective of what we know happens, like we know in our heart, like there's a different way to live when you are a follower of Christ. And because of that, we should hold our marriages. Doesn't mean that we won't have similar problems, but you would think that people that truly believed and were practicing were going to hold covenant to a higher standard.
Yes.
And so what you're saying is they do.
We do. Yeah. We do. And all the news to the contrary, we do. And that the people who make their faith a part of their life, who actually attend church regularly. And by the way, those studies were just looking at church attendance. That's it. Not going further than that, getting into a small group, becoming a more deep a part of a community, or praying together, or Bible reading together. Those are going even further. This is just, are you getting your butts in the seats in general Sunday mornings? Yeah. And for that to drop the 50%, for that to drop the divorce rate by up to 50%. Yeah. Just imagine the difference that it makes if you go even further than that and you become part of a supportive community, where, you're in a small group and somebody's going to really notice. Yeah. Are you guys okay? Well, actually, we're having problems. And that process alone is one of the major factors. Yeah, you talk about that in the whole first section. You talk about what are these factors that help contribute to a stronger marriage. And it was so encouraging because, as I mentioned, the Illumination Project, which was that thing that my dad and I did, it was like, my heart was like, okay, we can give my generation like tips about marriage, but like the biggest thing behind this is that we actually need to be in conversation with people who are single, dating, married, divorced, and then have older, wiser counsel. Like that to me is what the church is supposed to be, because you talked about being in this community and having people, I always say, live in the light, like let people in. Like you don't, like I am so thankful that my friends that I was like, don't say the divorce word. Like, I'm thankful that they came to me. And I'm not saying that it was me that did anything great, but like they actually took steps to like talk to some people about it. Yeah, they didn't just continue on a solitary path and file divorce and tell people later. Yeah. They told people in advance, this is what we're thinking and this is why, and I'm in pain and maybe it's better. And opening yourself up like that is one of the key factors for success in your marriage, including because it allows someone to come alongside you and say, it doesn't have to be this way.
And that's why I think everybody, whether you're single, dating, married, in a good marriage, in a bad marriage, need to read this book, because I think we are, everyone around us is going to be impacted by marriage or relationships to some degree. And we need to know these tools. We need to know these facts. And one last thing because I know I want to let you go, but have you taken the Strengthsfinders test?
I haven't, believe it or not. I really need to. Everybody keeps asking me that.
Okay, $5 says that your number one is input. Input is like that you can collect information and retain statistics. For the life of me, I cannot remember one stat. There's like one stat that I kind of try to quote from Love and Respect research. I always like dyslexia it and like mix numbers up. I am amazed by people like you who can just be like, doot, 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 doot.
Is this the one that says that men would give up love to get respect?
What? No, it's the number. It's the number. Oh no, I know that's that was
my number. Yeah.
No, it's the we surveyed 7,000 people. It's just aligning with like Gottman stuff where we researched our people. 83% of men in conflict feel disrespected. 72% of those.
No, that's mine.
Yeah. Oh, that's yours as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But Emerson, your dad, helped me figure out how do I word this and what should I ask. And he's
Yeah.
like, okay, here's what you need to ask because
Yeah.
we need to know this number.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Oh man. So, but I'll be like, I think I say 82 and then 73 and then when I'm like, wait, it was 72 and 80. I don't know. But anyways, I get this picture. It's kind of you like in this, like as I read through all these things that you debunked essentially, or were digging into, I like picture you in this office with like papers and you're throwing things because I'm like such a conspiracy theorist at heart. Yes, I'm correct.
Hold on. See that box down there on the floor?
Yeah.
You probably can't even see that. That is filled with papers that are now no longer sitting stacked up on my desk, but now they're stacked up on the floor. So
I love it.
Pretty much.
Well, and that's the thing is like, so in my little conspiracy theorist heart, like you have that whole section where you're like, yeah, there's also the completely wrong statistics about, second and third marriages being just like really doomed, like 70 something or whatever. And you talked about how you were digging into this one stat that was out there from the Census Bureau, and you finally got to the bottom of it and it never was like, it just never existed. Who would do that? Like who would?
It's not like people are trying to be deceptive. It just looked really official. Now you know how
but looked official like who? But you said it never even existed, right?
No, someone somewhere. I mean, like you go on Snopes.com, right? You go and you look at all the things that people think are true. Like if you forward this email, Bill Gates will give you $10,000, right?
And I do.
And someone somewhere created that email because they're a joker and they wanted to make people look stupid. I don't know. And people forwarded it. Well, this is the same thing. Someone somewhere created something and said, ooh, let's say this is a source, that 60% of second marriages end in divorce. That sounds good. That sounds really, really high. Let's say it's according to Census Bureau table such and such, because that looks really official, right?
But that's still they still know that they're doing something wrong, right?
Whoever did the very first one of those, yes, absolutely. Someone somewhere, it was the equivalent of the Bill Gates email. They were going, oh, this is good. This is going to, and they were probably just playing a prank. However, it got passed around and passed around and passed around and passed around. And now it's cited as one of the main sources for the fact that 60% of second marriages end in divorce. And so we're tracing it. And so that's our job as we're writing this book. We go look at the table. And because that table exists, but it doesn't say that. Like we're looking at it upside down and sideways and going, okay, this is, I mean, we really are. Because every now and then, sometimes those tables, if you combine 3 different numbers and subtract by 2, every now and then, you can come up with something. We could not see that number anywhere. So we called the Census Bureau. They know us really well by now. We're like, okay, we got another one for you. And they're like, oh yeah, no, that's not us. We've heard that too, but no, that's not us. We've never found that. And it basically, we traced all these sources for that 60% of second marriages end in divorce thing, and they all trace back to 3 sources that don't exist. It's a pure urban legend.
You want to know my theory is, my conspiracy theory is it probably was some sadistic divorce lawyer who was like, if I implant this in people's mind, then more people are going to get divorced and I'll make more money. So there you go. That's the answer.
And unfortunately, one of the reasons I think it kept going and going and going is that it matches the discouraging conventional wisdom that we all think is true.
It's the white car.
And so, the white car, you see it everywhere. I got the white car because I wanted to be unique, and then suddenly I'm seeing white cars everywhere. Yeah. And no, it wasn't that, everybody started buying white cars. I just noticed them. There's another one. You're predisposed to think that there's so many divorces because you have, let's just say, somebody at your church has a major moral failure, and a pastor or somebody that you see a lot, and he leaves his wife for the secretary, and you think, yep, there's another one, as opposed to going, okay, that is the exception.
Yeah,
that's not the rule.
Literally, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so we need to get out there, and let me just share for the second marriage people out there who are either single again and wondering whether they want to risk it, getting married again, or they're in a second marriage and they've been told that their marriage statistically won't make it, which is like death. I mean, seriously, come on. So they need to know urban legend. It's not true. And we don't know what the second marriage divorce rate is exactly, but we can get closer.
Yeah.
Just like 71% of women are still married to their first spouse, 65% are still married to their second spouse.
Yeah.
And the 35% that aren't, a much bigger chunk of that has to be death than divorce. And in first marriages,
later.
They're getting married at older ages.
That death factor, people need to know that.
It's killing you, isn't it? We think probably the second marriage divorce rate is probably closer to maybe 30%. So again, still too high, but it means that the vast majority of remarriages are going to last a lifetime.
Yeah.
And that you don't need to do the things that I think sometimes in first marriages or in remarriages, it's really easy to feel like when you feel statistically you probably won't make it, which we now know isn't true, it's easy to do things to protect yourself.
Yeah.
You know, to have the little bank account on the side, for example, and to say, well, just because I have to protect my kids.
Yeah.
You know, I would be not wise. It would be foolish, and to not try to do some of these things to protect myself. But what we found in some of the other research is that those things you're doing to protect yourself, they build a wall.
Yeah.
And they create a lack of trust, and they actually cause the problem you're trying to protect yourself from.
It's the whole same thing with what you're saying about that mentality of futility. You're contributing to it's like what's the thing, like if you build it, they will come. That's not what I was going to say, but it's like, it's inevitable.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah.
Which you also, there's two other things I want to ask you. Is it okay?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure, absolutely.
You talk about the, we hear the whole thing of like, we shouldn't live together before we get married. And like we know, as Christians, there's reasons, but then just from statistics, we know it's not as good. But you have a really great phrase, sliding versus deciding, which I think is also, it proves why our mental state impacts what we eventually do. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually not my phrase. It's from a professor named Scott Stanley, who's done a ton of research on this. He's at the University of Denver, and his stuff is so well done. I just have such respect for him. And he actually, there's a blog that he has called Sliding versus Deciding about living together. And that's one of the things that various researchers have found many times over the years, despite what you might have heard otherwise, that one of the factors that is more likely to lend itself to divorce is if you live together before you eventually get married, that marriage is more at risk. And it's funny because people think, well, you wouldn't buy a car without test driving it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to
logically living together makes sense.
Logically, it seems to make sense. And what we don't realize is that the act of living together, unlike the act of driving a car before you test it, before you buy it, the act of test driving a marriage actually breaks the future marriage. It does something that sort of reveals you go into it with less of a commitment, and you are more likely to slide into marriage as opposed to if you never lived together and you were just doing traditional dating and you spent a lot of time together, and there started to become warning signals. Like maybe we should slow this down a little bit. Maybe this isn't the right person for me. Let's slow down a little bit and really think about whether we should go forward. And some of those time you patch it up and you move on and you get married. But some of the time you're like, those warning signals were probably good ones. And so you say, you know what, we need to break up and not get married. Well, now imagine that exact same dynamic, but you're living together.
Yeah.
You're sharing an apartment, you're sharing all the bills, you're sharing the dogs, and all of that makes it really hard to actually break things up. And it's more easy to try to ignore those warning signs and just keep going, and you slide into marriage.
Yeah.
And so that is why you are more likely to be in the place of finding yourself divorced later. Now, it's not like you're doomed. I mean, I have several really close friends who, when they heard, this, their eyes got real big because they'd lived together before they got married.
Yeah,
and I'm
me
like,
too. Yeah.
You've gotten married. You've been married for 20 years now. You have 3 kids.
Yeah.
Honestly, you're fine.
Yeah.
you went through the crazy period, and you've reaffirmed your commitment that this is a commitment. Things have changed in your life. You're good. Don't worry. It's not like this sword hanging over your head.
It's just saying on the front end, it's like we have
it's
enough.
Better to know.
Yeah, you've got to go into marriage being able to make the wisest decision that you can with the information that you have. It doesn't mean that there's never a formula, but it's just going, what's the wisest route that I can take? And I feel like the test driving thing, I just was thinking about this, it doesn't even really hold up, because you could say dating, like formal dating, would be like the test driving, whereas you're never going to have a car dealer say, hey, you know what, take the car home, and when you decide you really want it, then pay me for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's how we can rework
that. That's a great analogy. I might have to use that one. Can I borrow your name and say, Eggridge came up with this great analogy.
I swear I was listening to you, but it just like hit me as we were talking about that, because that's what people always say, and I never really. Okay, but here's my other question. So you said in your book about, obviously we know that there is a higher level of divorce when someone's 16, 17, or when they don't have a college education, or when they don't have a good community around them. But and then you say it's, a better age bracket is kind of mid-20s and up. And I always, people ask me like, how young or what age should you get married at? And I usually land on like, yeah, obviously those really young ages, there's going to be factors that are probably more difficult, but it's more about maturity and whatever. But then I feel like I read, I want to say, and if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but John Van Epp in his book, How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk, which was really helpful for me. I think he talked about the, like, yes, mid-20s to early 30s is good, but then there's actually like, once you get older and older and you've never been married, then then the statistics change a little bit. And
yeah, and this is one of the problems. Okay, and this is again, you're hearing the power of statistics and the power of what we believe.
Yeah.
Because
I'm 32 and I'm getting scared.
Yeah, no. So listen, no. See, here's really the bottom line on this. One of the things that I found with some other projects that I've done is that because people are scared of commitment, and frankly, you have sometimes, and this is stereotypical, but the statistics do play out this way generally. You have men who are a little more likely to be scared of commitment, and you have women who are a little more likely today to feel like, I have to make my mark first. I have to go out and work on my career, and I'll get around to the dating people eventually. And if it happens, it happens. And so unfortunately for, let's just say, women, one of the things that is a fairly common dynamic is you have a woman who's working 70 or 80 hours a week. She's got a really fulfilling career. She's rising through the ranks. And she kind of looks around at 32, 35, 40 and goes, wait a minute, I've kind of missed a whole big part of my life here. And, and what I always tell women, it's not about the age, really. It's about being purposeful. Like, would you ever just let your career just kind of happen?
Yeah.
Most of the time, these women who are real go-getters, like, they have a plan. They think, I probably need to be mentored by so-and-so. So I'm going to do a little bit of work to try to get to meet that person. And I can tell that if I'm going to move up, I can't be in this division because there's just no spots above me. So I need to move over, and then I can move up through the ranks in this division. And so they start applying for these jobs, and they think ahead. They're purposeful. They're intentional. But for some reason, they think romance is just supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And what I tell women is, and men too, it's not necessarily about an age. It's about intentionality at any age, and not being kind of blind to that during the prime years where people generally tend to meet each other, which is in the 20s and early 30s.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, the key.
Yeah.
Is that intentionality. It doesn't just, of course, you believe God can do anything, but in general, it doesn't just happen that way.
Well, and I think there's been at least what I found with a number of people who would identify as Christians, there's a deep level of fear around marriage because of the stats that they hear, whatever. But they'll veil their reasoning for not being proactive in like, well, the Lord's going to do what he's going to do. And it's really their fear, I would never do online dating, or, oh, don't set me up, or, all these things. And I'm like, do you think that if you just sit at home and knit that like some way it's just going to, show up on your doorstep? Like, we do serve a God of miracles. However,
exactly.
If this is your fear, you're masking your fear in spiritual, talk.
Yes, exactly. I'm right there with you. I do know. I have probably at this point, I have hundreds of friends and hundreds of people that I know as acquaintances or friends that I've met over the years. And I have met one married couple out of those hundreds who he did show up at her door as the pool repairman. Yes. So that has happened once.
So you're saying I need to get a pool?
Out of about, probably 400 couples, I have heard of one of those stories. So that's statistically, possibility. God can do anything.
Yeah.
However, let's look at the other 399.
Exactly.
What seems to be the mechanism by which God works most of the time? And you can't and I agree with you, you can't out of either misplaced, and I hate to say it this way, but it is to some degree misplaced spiritual kind of reasoning, which is, well, God is going to do what God is going to do, so I have absolutely no responsibility in the matter.
Yeah.
And is that, really? Is that really the case? Like, you're really not supposed to take a step?
Yeah.
Like, if you think maybe God's calling you to be a missionary in Africa, for example, normally you wouldn't expect a missions agency to find your address and write to you and say, we'd like to invite you. You normally, you put out a few feelers and you say, okay, God, I'm going to have a couple of discussions with people and see if any interest comes and take a step and watch.
And you have to get on an airplane and get to Africa.
And it's kind of the same thing in your relationships.
Yeah. Oh man, well, this has been so good, and I really want everybody to get this. But you have a lot of books, and what I'm really intrigued by is that you actually started out writing fiction. One of your first books was The Lights of 10th Street, which you said led you to doing all this research on men and women. How did that happen?
Good memory. Yes. Well, it was simply because one of my main characters in the novel was a guy, and I didn't know how to put thoughts in his head.
And so you started researching men.
I started asking guys, what would you be thinking in this scene?
Yeah.
What would you be thinking so I can, figure out what a guy would be thinking.
Yeah.
And as they started telling me what they'd really be thinking, half the time I'm like, seriously? Like, it just shocked me. And I realized it wasn't just shocking, it was really important, like really foundational stuff. And that's what made me go, okay, I need to do a lot more of this. And that's when the research really started. And that's what became For Women Only. And that's when God hooked me up with talking to this man named Emerson Eggerichs. And that's when, there's been a pattern since then. Yeah.
Do you ever just for pleasure, do you ever do fiction writing anymore?
Oh man, well, I read fiction. That's like my thing. I'm not so much. I don't generally read nonfiction, even though I'm known for writing it. I like a good Christian novel.
Yeah,
that's like and that's like my thing. But I haven't had a chance to get back to writing the fiction, which kills me because I have two novels and there was a third sitting there half done.
Really?
When God gave me the idea for Women Only, and it's still sitting there half done.
Well, maybe you need to take a little sabbatical and finish up
that. Someday, yeah.
Well, thank you. I hope everybody checks out all of her books. We'll put all the information of everything you've ever done on the site. This has been super helpful. As I said, single people, dating people, married, divorced, whatever. Read the book, get the right statistics, and even though, like you said, they are changing and evolving, but the misconceptions have really contributed to this fear that I think so many of us have around marriage. So thank you for giving people hope. Thank you for chatting with me for an hour as opposed to a half hour.
No, it's totally fine.
Tell Storm I said goodbye.
Okay, I will.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye. Bye.